All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Writing. The show is presented by Gotham Writers, offering writing classes of all types and sizes. You can visit us online at gothamwriters.com. Before we get started, a few announcements. Firstly, the Gotham Writers Conference is officially open for registration. If you want a peek behind the publishing curtain, this is the place to be. Doubly so if you have a project that you're ready to discuss with agents. So you can check that out on the Gotham website as well. It's going to be October 15th through the 17th. Regarding today, at any point in the show, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists. For those of you who have been here before, you're familiar with that. But if this is your first time, there's a Q&A button on your Zoom dashboard. Any question that you want to have discussed by the panelists, put that in the Q&A. Then there's also the chat there. That's just for general discussion. So please keep general discussion in the chat and questions for the panelists in the Q&A. Lastly, if you want to get caught up on any episodes of Inside Writing, you can find them all on the Gotham Writers YouTube channel or on any major podcasting platform. And while you're there, please like us, subscribe us, leave a review. It helps to spread the word. Now then, on to the subject of the day, which is chapbooks and anthologies. We're going to jump right in and meet our panelists. So our first panelist, senior editor at Black Lawrence Press and author of several YA novels and poetry collections, including A Small Rising Up in the Lungs, Kill Your Darlings Clementine, and Echo Echo Light, Kit Frick. Hello, Kit.
Hello.
Thank you for being here, Kit. Our second panelist, the anthologies editor at Black Lawrence Press, author of the poetry collections The Giving of Pears and Sailing for Ithaca, as well as the editor of the anthologies Others Will Enter the Gates and Walking the Tightrope, Abayomi Animashaun. Hello, Abayomi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You as well. Thank you both for being here. So we're going to start how we always start these shows with some basic definitions. So Abayomi, starting with you, what is an anthology?
So thanks, Josh, again for having me here. It's a wonderful, thanks for the opportunity. So jumping right into it, I like to think of the anthology as an opportunity for representation and conversation. Of course, the anthology can do more. Of course, it can be a combination of both. But at heart, the anthology tends to do either or both of those things. Just to explain a bit further, by representation, I mean giving space for subjects or a subject or subjects that people may be somewhat unfamiliar. Right? And this is often the case for individuals who are outside of the conversation, who are looking in, trying to find a way in. They are unfamiliar with the players, and so on and so forth. By conversation, I mean giving space for people who are already inside, allow me to use the word again, conversation. They are already players. But giving space to them for them to better see what other people are saying about the subject or subjects. Like I said, there are variations, there are different kinds. The anthology can do both, but at heart, that's how I see the anthology.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And you touched on a lot of points I want to get back to here in a bit. But Kit, I want to ask you the same question, but for chapbooks. What is a chapbook?
Yeah, so a chapbook, historically, they've been around since like the 16th century, I think. It's a very old form of literature, and I will not do a deep dive into the historical term beyond just saying they've always been small, less expensive than a full-length book, and used to disseminate literature, sometimes political treatises or artwork. So in modern usage, when we're talking about a chapbook, it's really just used to mean shorter than a full length. And from there, branches out in a variety of directions, but a shorter than full-length collection of literature or literature and artwork. So I'm going to actually do like a really brief show and tell, because I think that is the most interesting way to see some of the variety of chapbooks that are out there, because they can come in so many different physical forms. So sometimes a chapbook will look something like this, where you've got the stitching. It's a handmade, both art object and book. And as you can see, relatively short compared to a full-length book. So that's one common example of how a chapbook might appear. Sometimes a chapbook might look more like this. So it's perfect bound, just like you would find any full-length paperback book, but shorter in length. And you can see this one has sort of a smaller square trim size. And then to show you a Black Lawrence chapbook, we also do perfect binding paperback, and we do a standard 5.5 by 8.5 trim size. And our books, we do ISBNs for all of our books, which is really great because they can be sold in a wider variety of retailers, but that is not something that is standard for a chapbook. I would say of my pretty big chapbook collection, maybe 25% come with ISBNs, and often you'll see, you know, more handmade saddle stitching or other types of stitching, limited print run, art object slash book. So there's a huge wide range when it comes to chapbooks, and there's a big variety of presses out there that all do their own thing. Anything ranging from the handmade small limited print run to what we do at BLP, where it's not a limited print run. We'll print multiple editions, just like our full-length titles, ISBN, all of that. And I'm not assigning value to one over the other. There are great benefits to all different types and styles of chapbooks. And one of the most wonderful things about them is how much variety there is out there in the current small press community.
Mm-hmm. And just to get out in front of this, what's the difference between a chapbook and a full-length book?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we're really just talking then about length. For poetry, I think that 48 pages has become a sort of accepted minimum for full length. And that's based on one of the larger poetry competitions. I believe the Yale Younger Prize has sort of created a industry-wide marker for this 48 page because that's their limit. Don't quote me on this. I could be wrong. It's the Yale Younger, but it's one of the major poetry prizes. So that's become a sort of accepted minimum for poetry full length. For fiction, I don't even know if there is an accepted minimum full length, but you know, for a short story collection, it's longer than that. For a novel, you know, your standard 200 some pages. For chapbooks, this also really varies by press. At Black Lawrence, we use a 16 to 36 page manuscript pages. We're not talking about like once it's been formatted to chapbook size, but your standard Microsoft Word document, you know, 8.5 by 11 page. We ask for 16 to 36 page manuscripts. I think we're kind of right in the middle of what I've seen other presses do. There are presses, especially ones that do handmade, like really small chapbooks that will do like 5 pages or 10 pages of poetry or fiction. I've seen up to 40 pages. Most presses won't go much longer than that, because then you really do get into that like 48 page full length territory.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Abayo, when it comes to, you know, you've edited a few anthologies, several. When it comes to editing, do you pick the theme, or what is the organization like for an anthology? Do you just pick a theme and then open to suggestion or submissions, or how does it work?
Josh, you were breaking up there a little bit, so I did not catch the middle and the end of your question.
Yeah,
If you
sorry.
mind asking again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just saying in the organization of anthologies, you know, because you've had experience editing them. Do you just pick a theme and then open to submissions, or how do you go about organizing how you're gonna put together an anthology with all these different pieces from different authors?
I'm sorry, I'm just writing down as best as I can your question so that I can think along with you. Um, there is no one size fits all for anthologies. The organization of each anthology, in my view, is dependent upon the vision of the anthology, um, the pieces received, and what the anthology wants to do. It's interesting. I like to believe that the anthology is greater than its editor, right? That the moment you begin to feel as if it's going to fit in a particular four square room, the anthology, if you're paying attention to it, will defy that kind of pigeonholing. Is that a word? Is
Yes.
pigeonholing? English is not my first language, I don't know. So we'll defy that. And it's the responsibility of the editor to be alert to that. I do not have a brick and mortar um, answer. All I can say is that one has to be attuned to how the pieces are in conversation with each other, one, and two, which ones you want to open with and which ones you want to close with. Um, because if you open with the wrong piece, then it may set the wrong tone. And as an editor, you'll want to be alert to that. And that's not what you want. You want to be as true and as honest to the anthology as possible and as inviting as possible.
Mhm.
There's a lot more to it than that. There's so much more to it than that. But those are my guiding principles.
Mhm.
I love that because there's so much overlap between how you're thinking as an editor in terms of organizing an anthology and how writers that are putting together a collection of poetry or short stories or lyrical essays, any sort of short flash, any sort of short pieces, are
Yeah.
thinking about organizing a single author collection. And of course, the editor often does get involved to some degree in the ordering as well, but often it at least begins and often ends with the writer in terms of how that organization works. And I've never really thought about that for an editor's role for an anthology, but it's so similar to how our writer brains think.
Right. Is it okay if I jump in and say one more thing based on Kit's comment?
Absolutely.
You know what, from what you're saying here, I've always felt that the anthology is also a genre of writing. I've not been able to put together enough arguments to sell it. But I feel it is. It is born of vision. It requires listening. It can't be knee jerk. The vision is often informed by reading and writing, and there's a need, right? It's not just anybody can do any anthology they want, but the anthologies that really matter, Against Forgetting, for Shay, right? For example, which is, in my view, a very good anthology. Um, these come from need, from reading and writing, and the recognition that there's something missing here that we need to address, right? Good writing does that too. And it's not the only thing it does that too. And, organization, all this thing. So I'm inclined to think of it as a genre. But then again, people will not believe me. So I just keep my mouth shut.
So I want to talk a little bit about, because we've talked so much about, these pieces being in conversation with each other. So I want to draw on your experiences as writers now, and about, because you both have poetry collections out there. Kit, I want to start with you. From the writer side of things, when should a writer start thinking about a chapbook? Like, with your experience, or a collection in general, when you started writing these, did you always intend to put them together, or did you just write a few poems and realize, hey, these all speak to each other, they should be together?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that. I have two chapbooks of my own that are published with different small presses. And in the case of Echo Echo Light, which was the first chapbook that I put together, that actually came from a full length that I had been working on as my graduate school thesis. And I had at least 48 pages or more of poems. And as often happens with writing that you begin in school, it became clearer to me by a couple of years out that there were really only sort of a section of this thesis project that I'd put together that really hung together as a collection. And I sort of lost interest in pursuing it as a full length. So what I did in that case was I pulled together a chapbook length collection of the full length had been comprised of, I think, 3 or 4 thematic series of poems. And so what I did was take this one grouping of poems that I'm still really interested in and energized by, and I put that together into a chapbook. So I don't think that's the standard way that folks go about creating a chapbook, but that was my first experience, was starting with this larger body of work and whittling it down and into something that I was really excited about and wanted to see as a collection. For my second chapbook, Kill Your Darlings, Clementine, I think it came about in a way that is probably more standardly the experience of a lot of writers putting together a first full length. So writers working toward a full length collection, which is often how chapbooks come about. Similar to the thesis book that never will exist as a full length book, I had several groupings of series or thematic groupings of poems that I was working on. And Kill Your Darlings, Clementine is maybe 75% of one of those thematic grouping of poems. And so I put that together while I was still working on the full length. I knew that it worked as a chapbook because there was both a conversation happening in theme and form between, or among rather, the poems in this chapbook. And so I started sending that out as a chapbook while the full length was still in progress, which isn't the only or right way to do things, but it is something that I think is a pretty common experience based on the authors that I work with at Black Lawrence. It seems to be a fairly common experience that the chapbook comes from an in progress full length that they are then working toward eventually putting together as a full length book. So in that case, the chapbook was accepted and came out. And then a couple of years later, I had a finished full length that I had submitted. And my full length book, A Small Rising Up in the Lungs, includes poems from Kill Your Darlings, Clementine, and a bunch of others. So I would say that's like a standard route, but definitely not the only one. And there are also many chapbooks out there that exist only as a chapbook. It's not part of a full length. It was never meant to be part of a full length. And that is also a perfectly acceptable and good and wonderful way to go about putting a chapbook together.
Abayomi, what about you with your poetry collections? How did you go about grouping these poems together?
Faith. Poetry is hard. Poetry is hard. it's enjoyable, it's fun. We feel as if it's the only thing that we should be doing, but it is old, it's been done a long time. It is hard. I don't have an easy answer. Um, I don't know. I essentially, so to speak more to your question, I try to pay attention to what I have and how they speak to each other. I know I keep coming back to that, but that's essentially what I pay attention to. I'm looking, one of the things I wrote down from what Kit was saying is that how pieces are in conversation in theme and form. I think that was the language Kit used. And that's also true for me. But in the writing of the poems itself, I try not to do that. I let each poem do its own thing. Because after a while in writing poems, I begin to hurry the process. I begin to try to make poems speak to a particular thing or a particular theme instead of letting the poems evolve organically, naturally. And the moment I do that, the manuscript starts to become um, predictable, right? And I feel as if, and as authors, we know too when our imaginations begin to stale. We know too when that staleness begins to inform the particular collection that we have. We can often identify the particular poems causing the staleness within the manuscript. The question then becomes, are we going to stay true and be true and honest and take those ones out? And in taking them out, we realize, oh my gosh, I no longer have 75 pages. Now I'm down to 25. Then what do I do? Right. So
Chapbook.
are we going to stay true and then wait a few more years for those other poems to arise organically, or are we going to be dogged and say and tell ourselves, invent all kinds of stories and keep spending all kinds of money sending out manuscripts that we ourselves know are not ready? So I try to be as honest as possible with myself, and I try not to hurry the process because then I get in all kinds of trouble.
So that brings up an interesting follow-up, and I'm sure there's no right or wrong answer to this either. But Abia, how do you know when it's done then? How do you know? I'm sure that, to say the conversation of the pieces is over isn't accurate, but how do you know when you've put in the right amount of pieces to call it finished? For anthologies as well, how do you know that it's reached that point where it can be done?
For me, it's when I can no longer make excuses for the poems in the manuscript, right? And I've put them aside for a year, 2 years, and they ring true. They ring true. And I still believe them. I'm still interested in them. They don't feel, just to use the word I used earlier, stale. They don't feel forced, self-serving, all those things. And putting the manuscript to the side, time will allow me to be able to, for the fluff to rise to the surface and for me to get them all out. And when that happens, I can use the biggest hammer on the manuscript. And if it continues to hold and continues to hold, then I feel as if I have something to send out. If not, then I can, again, like I said, continue to play that game with myself where I can explain and theorize as much as possible. Big ideas are in my manuscript. Look at it, and I know that. But then I know in the back of my mind that it's not ready. I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely it does. I like that answer. And Kit, I want to hear your take now on how you know when something is finished, or if you ever know that it's finished, or what your opinion there is.
Yeah, my answer is going to be actually very similar. Time is such an important factor in knowing when work is done. And it is much more difficult when you are an author writing under deadline and have, work due to a publisher, but much easier when you are putting together a collection that is just your own and you are not yet beholden to a publisher's deadline, which is often the case for poetry and short fiction and the small press world in general, which is probably a lot of the audience today. So yeah, it has a lot to do for me, similarly to what Abayo was saying, with putting a manuscript aside, and maybe that's weeks, maybe it's months. I don't think, you mentioned a year, I don't think I've ever had that much patience with myself. I'm impressed, but it's giving it the time that when you can return to it, the work no longer feels quite as precious to you and as hard to let go the specific pieces, whether it's poems, stories, whatever genre you're working in, that aren't working. Or maybe there's an issue with ordering that never would have occurred to you because you're so close to it until you set it aside and come back to it, and then it becomes glaring. So I think that the hard answer is you never really know when something is finished, or at least I've never, I don't have choirs of angels that descend and say, it's done, nothing that revelatory has ever happened. Maybe other writers have that, and I'm jealous of you. But I do find that with several rounds of leaving it and working on something else, or filling the creative well and working on nothing at all and coming back to it, when I finally am happy with everything, I have to feel joyful about it to feel that it's done. And when that happens, then I know.
Is it okay if I just piggyback and say just one or two more things?
Of course.
I think that it's important for authors to learn how to wear many hats, right? So not only are you the author of your work, it's important for you to wear the editor's hat as well. This kind of no-nonsense editor, being your own biggest critic, and so on and so forth, so that you're not making excuses for yourself. Another thing is that it's important for people to read and read widely, so that they can begin to internalize a series of standards from seeing how other people have done things. Their contemporaries, sure, but reading beyond their contemporaries as well. This old people from way back when who have died and no longer with us, to read their work, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, all these works, Paradise Lost. It's important to read all these books and to have a sense of their opening and their closures, so that we can begin to have a sense of how we will be putting our own books together and how we'll be closing them. But also to not be so in a hurry to get your book out, and not to take yourself so seriously, right? Right? To know that, yes, you're going to fail a lot, and that is par for the course. Expect it, look forward to it, and in a way enjoy it and make fun of yourself, because it's inescapable. It's inescapable.
These are really great pieces of advice, and I'm going to piggyback off of that to say, to make a case for when you are reading a lot and widely, to pick up books by the presses where you would like to see yourself published. I think there is certainly a case to be made for going back to the classics, absolutely. And there is just as big a case to be made for reading really, really contemporary work that is coming out from, whether it's small presses or large publishers, wherever your goal is of landing, see what is coming out now that is working and being published, and where you might fit into that genre. Maybe there are things you hate that are coming out now, and that's okay. That can also be informative in terms of like, this is not for you, but it is being published now. And what are your thoughts about that? What do you find that's coming out now that you love? It can help you direct your submission process when you are ready to send out. What imprints or what presses might be good homes for your work. So yes, reading time and reading time.
So I want to talk a bit about the submission process and how to know where to send your stuff and what you both as editors are looking for when you open up submissions. So Kit, we'll start with you. If you could speak to a little bit about what Black Lawrence's submission process is like, if you have windows, and then what you look for when chapbooks start coming in.
Absolutely. So in general, the press has 2 open reading periods every year in June and November, and that's when we're open in all of our submission categories, all of our genres, including chapbooks in both poetry and prose. We have a poetry category, fairly self-explanatory. Prose, we're open. It used to be just fiction. Several years ago, we broadened that scope to include narrative nonfiction, lyric essay, hybrid work, etc. We run 2 chapbook competitions annually, the Black River Chapbook Competition in both the fall and the spring. We also have a novel contest. We have a first book contest that is open in both poetry and fiction. And we have an open book contest, which does not need to, first books are eligible, but it does not need to be a first book. So basically we're open year round, but check out the submission calendar on our website, which is blacklawrencepress.com, to find specifics for what dates we are open to what. And before I go on in terms of what I'm looking for, I'm going to ping it over to Abayo for a moment, because the anthology submission process is a little bit different, and you know much more about that than I do. So will you speak to what that looks like at Black Lawrence?
Sure. So for anthology proposals, we look at them through the June open reading period and the November open reading. That's it. There are no competitions or anything of the sort, which makes sense, right? These are proposals. So those are the times that we look at them.
So if I could follow up on that really quick. So for the anthologies, what do you mean by proposals? So people send you a proposal for an anthology?
Yes. So people try to describe what their vision is for an anthology, you know, why it's needed, what it is, why it's needed, and why it should be published. So this is what we mean by proposals. That's the basic definition of it. But of course, there's a good deal more to it. Many people include a good deal more. They include samples and so on and so forth, the market, whatnot, as well. Other pieces that are similar, and why this particular anthology is different than the other ones available in the market currently.
Okay. Yeah, and I see Kit's putting some links down there in the chat. And as a reminder, we'll include those links in the show notes to all of our listeners. So thank you, Kit, for doing that.
Sure, yeah. I just dropped the link to our submissions calendar into the chat for all the attendees for easy accessibility. And Josh, if I'm correct, the second part of your question was about what we look for when we're opening up submissions. Is that right?
Yeah. What makes one chapbook stand out versus another, especially once you get down to the finals and there's just a few and you can only pick a few of them? What makes the ones rise above the others?
Sure. Well, let me take a step back quickly to tell you what our editorial process is like when we are reading submissions for chapbooks, because it's different if it is chapbooks that come in through our open reading periods or through the contest. So through the open reading periods, it is editors reading submissions. For chapbooks, it's me. I will share chapbooks with colleagues that I want a second read on or more editorial input, but I'm the front line of submission reading and the acquisitions editor for chapbooks. For our contests, the chapbook contest runs differently than our other contests because we work with a judging panel. So I work with a panel of our published chapbook authors. They are comprised of previous contest winners, published finalists, and also chapbook authors that have come in through our open reading period. And it's voluntary, open to all of our chapbook authors that have a time and interest in participating on the panel. And we do it rotating, so there's a different makeup every fall and spring. So in those cases, the judges and I will read in the first round of submissions. Every chapbook gets one read by a panel member or by me. And then the initial round of voting sends a group of chapbooks to another editorial colleague of mine who conducts second reads. She then makes recommendations on a larger semifinalist pool from those. They come back to me. I do more reading. We lock in the semifinalist grouping, and then a finalist grouping comes out of that. They go back to the judging panel, and then we vote collaboratively by committee for the winner of the Black River Chapbook competition. So it's usually anywhere between 8 to 12 judges reading per panel, plus me, plus any editorial colleagues that have the time and interest in participating in any given round. So it's a big group of folks that are reading and submitting rankings and sending in feedback. And so the winner emerges through this collaborative judging process. Sometimes I pick then an editor's choice as a second manuscript from the finalist pool. Sometimes I don't. It depends on what's happening in the open reading periods also, because I'm also considering all of those chapbooks, and we have a limited list of how many that we can select each season. So that is the broad strokes of how the process works from a technical perspective. From a taste perspective, that's much more difficult to speak about because often it is you know it when you see it. And that is, I know, very frustrating to the attendees watching this because it is really hard to say, I know I love it when I see it. That does not help you. But I will say to try to be as helpful as possible, when I am reading chapbooks, I am looking for a collection that hangs together as a chapbook. And that can come in a lot of different ways. It does not, we were talking before about theme and form and the different ways that poems or flash or short stories or lyric essays, multiple genres, can speak to each other. It is certainly not the case that a chapbook has to be all poems on one theme. That is only one way in which a collection might hang together. There can be multiple ways that the work within speaks to each other and creates a cohesive collection. And people talk about like a greatest hits type collection or a mixtape. I think these are words we use a lot to describe types of short collections. All those things can work, those styles in chapbooks. But whatever it is, it needs to work as a cohesive short collection. For me, as one editor speaking, you may speak to editors at different presses and they have completely different editorial tastes and ideas of what a chapbook should be. So I want to clarify, I'm not speaking about the right way to make a chapbook writ large, but I am talking about what works for me. I want it to read like a book and not just like a scattershot collection of very good poems or very good flash pieces, which might be great, but that's not necessarily going to make that chapbook rise to the top for me if it's not feeling cohesive in one way or another. So I hope that is one piece of concrete-ish editorial advice that I can give. And the only other thing I will say, and I'm not making a plug to buy every Black Lawrence Press book, that's not why we're here today, but going back to my recommendation about reading from the presses that you want to be, or you think you might want to be published by, presses that you're interested in, do make an effort. We have, I know you cannot, of course, afford to buy our entire chapbook collection, most of you, but we do make an effort to publish peek insides, just like Amazon has when you go to a book and, you click to look inside. So we have on both our website and on Small Press Distribution, which is our distributor, we have samples of all of our chapbooks for sure. I think almost all of our full lengths as well have peek insides up there, so you can read a sample of work from the collection. There's a sample poem or excerpt from a prose manuscript that's right on the webpage. So there are completely free ways to get a sense of the work that we're putting out. A lot of presses do similar things. So that's, I think, as good a way as any to get a sense of a press or editor's editorial taste when thinking about where your work might fit in the publishing landscape.
Mm-hmm. And Abayomi, coming over to you for the anthology side, what's the editorial process there? What makes one submission stand out over another?
So as Kit was saying that she is the acquisitions editor for Chapbooks, I'm the acquisitions editor for anthologies. And to speak more to your question of what makes one proposal stand out more than the other, often is the vision of it, right? And I'm underscoring and here, and if the person sending in the proposal adequately answers or addresses why this anthology should be out in the world. We've had so many anthology proposals that they're great. The vision is wonderful. It's great, but the person or the person sending in this proposal does not adequately answer why we should put this anthology out, or that the anthology is not at all for a general audience, right? And this is what we want. We want anthologies for a general audience. In terms of process, so many anthologies come in. I fall in love with so many proposals. It's great. There's just so much vision out there. There's so many wonderful authors, but I can only choose one anthology per year. So it's so competitive, and it just breaks my heart to say no to so many wonderful anthology proposals. And even when we go through the June reading period and I see several wonderful proposals, I have to hold them, November reading period, I have to hold them to the next June reading period so that I can compare and choose the best one of the lots. So it's important for authors to do their homework, to know the market, to be able to speak of why, or speak to why the particular anthology, when it comes out, is going to be different from the anthologies already, right? To understand what the conversation is, to be able to speak articulately to the so what, who cares question within the proposal. And many people don't, and it's just heartbreaking.
Abayo, can you also speak a bit about, once you have selected a anthology from its proposal, then if there are writers that are interested in submitting a piece for that anthology, how does that work? Is it the writer that has submitted the proposal that then manages the editorial process of putting together the anthology from individual pieces, or are you involved in that directly? Like, what does that look like?
So thank you for that question. Yes, it becomes an all hands on deck kind of a thing. I'm very involved in the process of going from the proposal to a book. Every step of the way, I am involved. I help with creating a call for submissions if we don't have a full manuscript that the person has sent in. If we have to hunt around and look for fresh submissions, I'm very involved in helping craft a call for submissions. And you will see too that the call for submissions have a particular characteristic to them. So you can tell that it's coming from kind of one person, the way they sound. So you know who the person is, right? So I'm very much involved in that process. And in conversations with the authors have autonomy. They do what they need to do. But I'm there every step of the way to help guide them through the process, especially if they're new to publishing, because it is intimidating, it can be overwhelming, and they may have all kinds of questions. So I'm there every step of the way to help them move from accepted proposal to published work.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that, Kit, because that was gonna actually be my next question anyway. So I appreciate it. So we're gonna get some audience questions in here now. So first question, Kit, I think I'll start with you on this one. Do you recommend publishing a chapbook or full length for a first-time poet getting published? Or I think that
chapbook versus full length, is that the question?
I would say that, and then also in addition, because I think this might be helpful, should you do a chapbook before you have other single poetry published out there?
I don't think there is any right and wrong to this. I don't think there is one path that is more advantageous than the other. I do think that having the experience of submitting individual poems or groups of poems to journals can be helpful in just sort of learning the ropes of how it works, and in terms of the experience of getting rejections and learning to, like, how are you going to handle that, and what's your process going to be for how that informs revision or doesn't, or sending more work out. How is that going to work for you? I know as an editor, I am always interested to see if there are acknowledgements included that list prior publications of individual poems or short stories in the chapbook, but it's never part of my decision in terms of whether or not I'm going to accept a chapbook if any of it has been previously published or not. Similarly for full lengths, I think there can be, like, it can be great if there's been a chapbook. Doesn't matter if there's been a chapbook. I don't have a strong editorial feeling on how much prior publication there has or has not been from that work. And again, I can't speak for other editors at other presses on this. This is just me, but I do not think that it's something that editors are making any decisions on. It may be more or less part of a holistic decision-making process for some more than others, but no, I think it's really what works for you and your project. No right or wrong path there.
Mm-hmm. And Abayomi, do you have anything to add to that? Even if there's not a right or a wrong way to doing it, do you think it's advantageous to publish single poems first, to go for a chapbook right off the bat? What do you think?
I'm writing a question that so it's easy for me to think through it. No, I don't think so. I don't think there is a clear step-by-step direction, a 1, 2, 3 step-by-step direction for poets to journey through their paths. It's each poet's path is different. Each poet's path is his own. Each one must, as I like to say, walk their own mountain paths. So there is no, some people will publish their chapbooks first, some people will not publish chapbooks. I sent out a lot of chapbook manuscripts and none of them got published. The first book that got published for me was a full-length poetry collection. So for me to now say that, don't worry about chapbooks, focus on your big manuscript, it doesn't add up. Or for me to say, you know what, vice versa, do this, don't do that. Usually doesn't work. The moment you tell a poet, don't do this, you're in trouble.
So next question, Abayomi, I'll start with you on this one. Is an anthology typically many authors or one, and can it consist of nonfiction? So if you could talk a bit about what goes into, like, what pieces can go into an anthology, and then what genres, if it spans different genres, or if it's all going to be poetry, or it's all going to be fiction, or how that works.
So like I said earlier, I believe, so you see me looking down, I'm trying to scribble down as quickly as I can your question here, so I can think through it. As I said earlier, I believe that the anthology itself is a genre. I have nothing to back that up, so I often keep quiet about that, as I mentioned earlier. But like I said, but in addition to that, within that genre is large enough and expansive enough to hold different genres within it, either single genres like nonfiction or multiple genres like poetry, nonfiction, fiction, and so on and so forth, depending upon the vision and what the author is trying to do. An anthology, by definition, if it's by our earlier definition, if it's about representation and or conversation, seems to me that it should have multiple authors. Because if we are not looking at multiple authors, then it becomes a profile book, right? Or an original work by a particular person. A profile book where somebody is talking about the different works by somebody else may be a subgenre of the anthology, but I don't see it as the anthology proper. Even when people are doing that, they have multiple people talking about the particular author. So even with that, you have multiple perspectives, multiple authors at play in that one volume. So the anthology, by definition, has multiple people talking about certain things, or multiple people, I'm sorry about that, multiple people being represented within it.
Mm-hmm. Next question, Kit, I'll start with you on this one. Can you speak to submissions as regards to the increasingly blurry lines between genres?
Perhaps. What would you like me to speak to? I will say that at Black Lawrence, we welcome hybrid work, and our submissions policy is that you should submit to the category that most closely aligns with your collection. If it is, for instance, for the Black River Chapbook competition, where we have both a prose category and a poetry category, if you're submitting a hybrid collection, just pick one. It's all going to be read by the same group of people ultimately, and we welcome hybrid work. So we're not over here saying this has 5 poems and 15 flash pieces, and that's not what we do. So we're pretty open in terms of, we just want to read your work and we want you to follow our guidelines. But in terms of hybrid work and other genre slippiness, we're here for it. And I don't know what else the person asking the question might have been wondering, but at least from a submissions angle, that's how I can address that.
Can I add something to that too, if you don't mind, Josh?
Yeah.
That please state it helps editors when authors stay true to the particular genre, to the requirements of each submission element, right? So, for instance, you don't want to. I've had instances where people will say, by the way, I'm submitting to your anthology reading period here, but this is a poetry collection that I think you like. So a poetry collection is not an anthology. So it helps to pay attention and for people not to do that. It often has this kind of how to say, adverse effect than what the author was intending when when they were trying to sneak one in. So
yes, for sure. Like do please read guidelines, and there's definitely a difference between we love hybrid work and like here's a poetry collection for your anthology proposal submission.
So then last question before I get into how people can find you online is just parting advice to people. For Kit, I'll ask you, for people that want to do chapbooks, what's your advice to them? Abayomi, I'll come to you afterwards and ask, for people that want to get into an anthology or have a proposal accepted, what would be your parting advice to them? But Kit, let's start with you. For people that aspire to publish a chapbook, what's just one piece of advice? You've given us so much already, but one piece of advice that you feel like people should be keeping in mind.
Yeah, specifically check out a lot of chapbooks that are there. While there is a wide variety of chapbooks that are out there, they are a different beast from full lengths. And there are so many presses that are doing chapbooks. And I think just reading many and submitting widely once you're ready to submit. I did drop into the chat, and Josh can put in the show notes links to both Entropy Magazine's Where to Submit the General link, which is my favorite resource for folks that want to submit. Entropy compiles so many different presses, journals, individual calls for submissions. And there is a separate chapbook, and then they break it down in like 3-month chunks. So, for June, July, August, what's open? There's a separate chapbook category within that. And I also put that direct link for the current open June, July, August call. So it's a great resource for finding out who's publishing chapbooks, what does it look like at this press. You can organize yourself in advance in terms of when our place is going to be open. So that's a good organizational, I think, piece of advice, because part of submitting is being, there's our like writer brain, and then there's our like trying to get published brain, which is a little bit different and involves knowledge of guidelines and other organizational tools like this. So I think Entropy is my favorite, and I always recommend that one.
And Abayomi, what about you? For people that want to show up in anthologies, what's your advice to them?
Fall in love with anthologies to begin with. Love them, look for them, look to read them, buy them. It takes a lot to put together an anthology. Even though it's not your work, it takes at least between 3 and 5 years to put together an anthology. Read widely and understand what the conversation is and where the gaps are. And let your proposal be fueled by that, right? Because if it's not, it shows in the proposal. After doing this for a while, we can readily tell proposals that are not informed by reading, proposals that are not informed by the gaps in the community and doesn't understand what the conversations are. And again, as I said before, in your proposal, address the so what, who cares? Why should somebody on the streets who is, let's say at the airport, running to their next gate, why should that person pause to look and pick up your anthology and say, this is the particular book that I'm going to buy? Why should they do that? So the moment you begin to think about those things, it makes your proposals stronger. And it just breaks my heart when people don't do as much of that, of their homework. I can only accept one, and there's so many wonderful, wonderful authors out there. I think this would help them better, be better positioned when they send their submissions in.
And then last thing, I'm sorry, we're going a little bit over. I just want to give you both a chance to promote if you have something coming out, something you're looking forward to, or where people can find you online. So Abayomi, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Kit.
Before I was brought on I was recently brought on as the anthology's editor for Black Lawrence Press. I think this happened 2 years ago, I think. And I was almost all the way done with Far Villages, Welcome Essays for New and Beginner Poets, my third anthology published through Black Lawrence. And I also have a new poetry collection through Black Lawrence Press that addresses being a Black immigrant in the United States, titled Seahorses.
All right, thank you. And Kit, how about you?
Yeah, so it's June, which means that our June open reading period is open at Black Lawrence. You can find us on the website and Submittable, and I'll get those links to Josh if he doesn't have them already to put them in the show notes. So that means we're open in all of our categories, including chapbooks. So if you want to get chapbooks our way, open reading periods open now, and then we will have the next, we're currently in the judging phase for the spring Black River chapbook competition. So that is closed, but we will be opening back up in the fall, September 1st through October 31st for the fall Black River chapbook competition. So that's another way to get chapbooks to us.
Awesome. Well,
can I say just one thing?
Absolutely, yeah.
That please know that you have somebody rooting for you. I love anthologies so much, and I wish I could publish like 10 anthologies a year. So you have somebody out there rooting for you. I'm not one of those editors who's just like, it's a hack and slash, one of those things. I'm not one of those people. I'm genuinely rooting for people. So I look forward to reading your submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. And to all of our listeners, this was our last episode of the season, so we're not going to be back next week, but stay tuned. We'll probably be back in about 2 months, and we'll email everyone about that. But Kit, Abayomi, thank you both so much for being here today. This was a great discussion.
Thank you. Loved it.
Thank you so much.
And that's the end of the season, so we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.